All right, today we are diving deep into the Talmud to solve a legal mystery, a real head-scratcher that has fascinated scholars for centuries. And believe it or not, it all starts with a tiny crack in a very important altar.
So I want you to picture this. You've got the main altar in the temple in Jerusalem. This is the absolute heart of the entire sacrificial service. Now, what happens if it gets a crack? It's damaged, right? It's not whole anymore. So can the priests keep eating their sacred portions of the offerings? That's the question that kicks off our entire investigation.
Okay, so to get started, we've got to understand the basic rules of the game here. Let's just lay out the simple facts of the case before things, get complicated.
First up, we have a special category of sacrifices called most holy offerings. You can think of these as the absolute top tier, the VIPs of the sacrificial world. And they have really strict rules about where and how they can be eaten, specifically only by priests and only inside the temple courtyard.
Now for these big deal offerings, the law seems pretty clear. There's a scholar, Rabbi Elazar, who says a verse in Leviticus means these things can only be eaten when the altar is perfect, totally whole. So, if the altar's got a crack in it, these most holy offerings are off the menu. Case closed, right?
Well, not so fast. Because as you probably know, in the world of the Talmud, solving one problem just has a way of opening up an even bigger, more interesting one.
And this is where the real mystery begins. What about all the other sacrifices? The more common ones, the ones of lesser sanctity. These could be eaten by regular folks, not just priests, and in a much bigger area. Does a busted altar disqualify them too? The text, it doesn't really say.
So to figure this out, one of the great Talmudic minds, a sage named Abiye, takes us on what feels like a totally bizarre detour. He doesn't look at other sacrifices. Nope, he looks at agricultural tithes. I know it sounds random, but trust me on this one. This is where the genius is hiding.
So Abaye, he digs up this old debate. And the question was this. After the temple was totally destroyed, so no altar at all, could people still bring their special agricultural tithes, called second tithes, to Jerusalem to eat? He's going to use the logic from this completely different case to solve our problem with the cracked altar.
He kicks things off with an analogy. A firstborn animal offering, it has to be brought to the temple. A second tithe, it has to be brought to Jerusalem. So the logic goes, since you can't offer the firstborn without a temple, maybe you can't eat the second tithe without a temple either. It's a parallel argument, you see.
But hold on a second. There's a problem right away. That's a pretty weak analogy. A firstborn animal is a real sacrifice. Its blood literally has to be sprinkled on the altar. A second tithe is just food you eat in Jerusalem. The altar is essential for one, but it seems totally irrelevant for the other.
But Abaye's source has a comeback. It says, okay, forget the firstborn for a minute. What about first fruits? That's another kind of offering. They don't need blood on the altar, but you still can't bring them if the temple isn't standing. So hey, maybe the blood isn't the key factor here after all.
But nope, that argument gets shot down too. See, first fruits have their own special ritual. They have to be placed right next to the altar. Second tithes, they have zero connection to the altar. So we're back to square one. Both examples so far, the firstborns and the first fruits, have a direct physical link to the altar, and our second tithe doesn't. The analogy, it seems to be falling apart.
So it really looks like Abaye's whole argument has just hit a brick wall. But this is where he pulls out his trump card. And he finally connects all the dots, bringing us all the way back to our original question about that cracked altar.
Abiye points to a specific verse in Deuteronomy, and this verse lists a bunch of things you're supposed to bring to the temple, and it mentions tithes right next to firstborns. And Abiye's big move is to say, hey, this isn't just a random list. This is a direct legal linkage. The laws of one can now be slapped directly onto the other.
Okay, this slide lays out his amazing chain of logic. Let's walk through it, because this is really cool. Step 1. We already know the blood of a firstborn animal needs a whole, undamaged altar. Got it. Step 2. The meat from that same animal is legally tied to its blood. They're package deal, you can't have one without the other. Step 3. That verse from Deuteronomy forges a legal link between the second tithe and the firstborn. So, you put it all together for step 4, and it means that by this chain of connections, the second tithe also depends on a complete altar.
And boom! That's the mic drop. By proving that even an agricultural tithe needs a fully functioning altar, Abaye has made his point. If something as seemingly disconnected as a tithe needs the altar, then you can be darn sure that the offerings of lesser sanctity need it too.
For Abaye, a crack in the altar disqualifies everything. The investigation, it seems, is over.
But just when you think the mystery is solved and the file is closed, a new character dramatically storms onto the scene from a different land, and let me tell you, he is not impressed.
A scholar named Rabbi Yirmiyah hears Abaye's beautiful logic and delivers this epic takedown. It is one of the most famous and frankly savage lines in the whole Talmud. He's basically saying, you guys are thinking about this all wrong because you're living in intellectual darkness. He thinks Abaye's brilliant proof and the halachot, the legal rulings that come out of it, are just totally dim-witty.
So why is he so confident? Well, it turns out he knows of two ancient sources that completely contradict each other on this very point. Source number 1 says that way back when the ancient tabernacle was being taken apart to be moved, a time when there was no standing altar, all the sacrificial food was disqualified. Now that supports Abaye. But another source says that sacrificial food could be eaten in 2 locations, which the Talmud understands to mean both when the tabernacle was standing and when it was being dismantled, and that directly contradicts Abaye.
So who's right? Is it Abaye, with his incredibly intricate logic, or is it Rabbi Yirmiyah, armed with these contradictory sources? Well, the final verdict reveals the true and maybe surprising nature of how the Talmud thinks.
The resolution is actually pretty elegant. Those 2 conflicting sources, they're not a mistake. They just represent 2 different sides of a really ancient debate. See, Rabbi Ishmael, whose logic Abaye was actually channeling this whole time, he held that you need a complete altar, period, and he's backed up by source number 1. But the majority of the sages, they disagreed. They believed you could still eat these offerings, and they are backed up by source number 2.
So the whole point, the big reveal, is that there is no single resolution. The whole mystery wasn't about finding the one right answer. It was about uncovering the fact that there was a fundamental disagreement all along. Abaye wasn't wrong. He was just brilliantly and logically arguing for one of 2 totally valid legal opinions. And Rabbi Yirmiyah's big contribution was to show that another, equally valid opinion was always out there.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. This whole journey, through all that intricate logic and the analogies and the challenges, it didn't lead us to a simple yes or no. It led us to a debate, and that forces us to ask, when the ultimate answer isn't a rule, but an argument, what is that trying to teach us? What does that say about the nature of law, of truth, and maybe the value of the process itself?